stories about how he used to coach college basketball, this and that. And the rain at this time is coming down so hard. And we're on like 2-lane highways. He's driving very fast. And I'm like, yeah, like great story. Like look at the road. And we're going and the windshield wiper breaks. And I'm like, oh, good. The windshield wiper breaks. He's for sure going to pull over, because it's raining so incredibly hard. And he's like, oh, this is a trick we used to do in my mid-major days in college. You just drive faster and the water comes off the windshield quicker.
And welcome back to Bars Loaded Podcast with Ben and Nick.
15s, I was like a flanker or a wing. And then for 7s, I was a prop. So I was pretty fast and a good tackler. And then like where I thrived with rugby was basically like my work capacity. Like I'm just like the endurance king. So I feel like rugby, if like you're not fit, it doesn't really matter really how athletic you are. And so for me, like I could definitely outfit a lot of people that were way more athletic or knew the game better than me. For sure.
Yeah, fair. So are you fairly short then?
Yeah, I'm 5'10", so I'm not short, but I'm not tall by any means, especially the people I work with now. I'm always the shortest person in the room, or I better be.
Yeah, no doubt. But from some of the recent photos that I've seen, though, I'd say you've probably got the biggest quads in most of the rooms you're in.
Yeah, I feel like I've always had, my mom will show me like baby pictures. I've like always had big legs, which is pretty funny. And then I think playing rugby through college, like that was when short shorts were a thing before, like now they're like mainstream, I guess. But it was kind of one of those things in basketball. You want to have big arms because everyone can see them. In rugby, if you have tiny legs, like you guys know it, everyone makes fun of you. So like, you can't be having that.
Yeah, feels. Funny story. Completely off topic, and we'll get to the interesting stuff after this. But you mentioned to me in the DMs when we were setting this up that you had some family in Melbourne, so you probably know a little bit about Australian sport. But over here, like obviously we have rugby, and we have Australian rules football as well, AFL, and they wear notoriously very short shorts. So short shorts and oversized tees are kind of like they've been a fashion in Australia for a long time.
Because ahead of the
that's
curve.
kind of like the athletic gym look.
Yeah.
Yeah, man. And then I moved over to the States and everyone's like, what the fuck are those things? Get some basketball shorts on. We don't want to see we don't want to see your knees. We wear baggy shorts and tight shirts.
Well, it's funny looking back at like some old pictures of me when I first got into strength and conditioning, and it was like I've been in it so long that the shorts were below your knees, and if anyone could see your knee, like you'd be made fun of like crazy. And I would never dream of wearing my rugby shorts anywhere in an American facility at all. And now if you have shorts that are below your knees, like you're just getting made fun of just as bad. So it's funny how that stuff always comes full circle and everything like that. But I'm definitely here for the short movement, or I hope it stays.
It's good for you. I mean, I'm 6'6", so regardless of how big my legs get, they look skinny.
Well, if you ever want to trade, let me know.
Nick, that's just a...
Yeah.
I was going to say, Nick, that's just a way that you can get away saying that you have small legs. Be like, oh, I'm 6'6".
I wish I had that excuse.
Dude, I'm 5'8". I don't have that excuse.
Yeah, you get it. It's tough out here for us under 6 foot tall guys.
Oh yeah.
All right, man. Well, thanks for joining us on the podcast. So for everyone that doesn't know, our guest today is Zack Zillner. Bro, I'm super excited to talk to you today. But and obviously, like, I've been following you for a while. I feel like you're the coach's coach. Anyone that's a SSC coach, especially in the States, but even over here in Australia, kind of looks up to you guys and what you guys are doing over there. But for our listeners that potentially kind of don't know who you are or the story of how you got started, do you want to kind of take us through the origin story? How did you originally find the gym and what did that look like for you? And then maybe tie that in and how that bled into coaching and where you've landed up today.
Yeah, so I grew up in Kansas City. Kansas is basically in the very middle of the United States, Midwestern city. I actually got into lifting at a young age from my mom. So growing up, you're watching movies of like Arnold Schwarzenegger and all that kind of stuff. And I'm like, Mom, like, how can I look like that? She's like, you got to lift weights and work out. And I was like, what's that? And she's like, when I get up every morning at 5 o'clock and go to the gym, like, that's what we do to lift weights. I was like, well, shoot, if I just come with you every morning, then I'll be big like Arnold, in a couple of years. And so she was like, well, if you want to get up and train with me, that's fine. But like, I'm not going to wake you up because that's kind of ridiculous for a 6-year-old to wake up your 6-year-old to go train. But I would set my alarm, pop up out of bed, and she'd take me to go work out. And her personal trainer, luckily, was very nuanced and was like, yeah, if Zach wants to train, we'll get him, body weight stuff. And then from there, my mom, I think I had a physical for school, and she was like, hey, he has this crazy wish that he wants to lift weights, but like I heard, it stunts kids' growth or anything like that. Like, what are some precautions? And luckily, my pediatrician was like, no, lifting weights is fine, but let's do it in a smart, progressive manner. So my mom bought me a set of weights from 1 pound to 5 pounds, and it was like pink, yellow, purple, red, and blue. And so the blues were the big ones. And so I was like, I can't be using these pink ones. So he wrote me up a little progression. It was like, had to do like 100 squats with the pinks, press it over my head, 100, like all these different things. And once I mastered that with perfect form, then I could go to the yellows and the purples and the reds and the blues. So I'd find myself like coming home after school or before school, like pumping out my reps and everything, just trying to graduate. And then I would have, every couple months, my mom would like test me out of a color. And then from there, like, I don't know why, but I always loved working. Like she'd joke that like our kitchen sink was set up where you could see out the backyard. And so she would time me running laps around the house while she was making dinner. I think part of it was just to get me out of the house. But she'd yell out, I'm sure,
absolutely
fake time. She'd like, that was 2 minutes. That was 1:58. And I was like, okay, cool. Yeah, here we go. I'd find myself, we had a huge hill in our backyard, and I would just like sprint up and down it. I'm sure the neighbors would just thought I was some crazy wild man. And then I got into sports, obviously, and I found that like I wasn't the most talented, but like I could always win the conditioning tests or anything work related. Like I love that more than honestly the games. And so I found like, hey, if I work here hard, it's hard for a coach to, not give a guy a chance who's like doing all the little things right. So I found myself, taking leadership roles on teams, being the captain and playing just in spite of my athletic ability, just because I had a motor. And, it came time for college, and I was going to do the usual thing where either get a business degree or I really wanted to be a teacher. But I was like, teachers don't get paid as much as they should. So I was like, maybe I'll go the business route, but I want to be a teacher. And the summer before I went to college, I did like odd jobs, construction work my whole time in high school. And then I don't think my mom wanted me to be a construction worker because she probably figured that's what I would like doing. And she was like, our receptionist, she's pregnant and she's going to be out of the office all summer. Like, you should come answer phones for my office. And I was like, oh my God, this is going to be miserable. And, everyone, you're the first person they see. So they're like, what are you going to do when you go to college? And I was like, probably get a business degree, but I really like training. Like, I want to train athletes. And everyone's like, personal trainer or athletic trainer? I was like, no, I want to train athletes. And no one really knew what that was. But one of the women that worked there, she was like, my brother-in-law is the head strength coach for the North Carolina Tar Heels basketball team. And I was like, they're a world-renowned team over here in the States. And so I shot him an email and was like, hey, I'm in high school. I'd love to get involved in strength conditioning. Like, where do I start? One of his really good friends worked at the University of Kansas, which was like 45 minutes from my house. So I emailed him at Kansas. I was like, hey, I'd love to come shadow you for a day. So I came up and I treated it like an interview. He didn't know he was interviewing me, but I showed up with my resume. I had a suit on, ready to get a Fortune 500 job or something. And we're like,
was that in the gym?
Yeah, I show up to the weight room and I have like a full suit and tie on. And like, your resume when you're like 17
so
is
good.
like you mowed yards and you like graduated high school, like nothing impressive. And so I shouted him for the whole
it's
day.
like 2 lines.
Exactly. I shouted him for the whole day. And then I was like, I'd like to intern. And he's like, well, you got to talk to the boss. And the boss at that time was Andrea Hootie. And she's very well known in the strength and conditioning community in the United States, probably the world, but I'd argue she's probably the best basketball strength and conditioning coach in the world. And I knocked on her door and she's like, what? And I was like, hey, I'd like to intern. She's like, what year are you? I was like, I'm a senior in high school. And she was like, when you graduate and you're a senior or your senior year of college, then you can apply to be an intern. And I was like, well, was there a way I could just be around? She's like, here's what you can do. She's like, you can show up every day, clean this whole weight room. And if there's time at the end of the day, you can observe some of the teams. And my background of like liking to work and, going the extra mile, I was like, dude, this is right in my wheelhouse. Like I can easily show up and clean. And so showed up the first day at like 4:35 in the morning, and the basketball team trained at 2 every day. So I was like, okay, if I clean all morning, I'll have enough time to observe basketball in the afternoon. So I did that for 2 years. Show up every day, clean all day. The weight room was the size of like a football weight room. There was like 24 platforms, like a whole 50 yards of turf. Like this thing was a behemoth. And I cleaned every square inch of it. And we had a time when a bunch of the assistant strength coaches left for better jobs, and she knocked on my little closet of an office and was like, hey, everybody left. Like, you need to start helping me. Let's dive in, see if you got what it takes. And I was like, oh, hell yeah. Like, let's go. And so I helped her with all the teams. I didn't suck too bad because after that, she hired me as a paid intern. And then I was there for my whole 5 years of my undergrad, which was truly an awesome experience. And then I guess from there,
that's such a sick story.
Yeah. I mean, it's just one of those things. It's just like where most people would turn that away and be like, I'm above cleaning or whatever. I feel like if you really love something, like that wouldn't have been a big deal. Now, if this was me working in an office, cleaning the office and shredding papers and stuff like that, like I don't necessarily think I'd really want to do that because like I didn't want to work in the corporate arena. But this is something that I really liked, and it's probably one of the biggest things I put on our interns of like, if your only job is to clean the weight room and that's what I'm going to judge you of, like be the best weight cleaner around and good things will happen.
Yeah, man. Dude, Ben and I talk about this all the time, and it's something. So we do 2 podcasts a week. One is kind of just Ben and I are talking about a specific topic, and then one is with a guest, like like what we're doing right now. In the other podcast that we did just last week with Ben and I, we kind of talked about 5 essential traits, I guess, or like prerequisites that every coach should have, and one of them that we brought up was passion. And I think that's kind of what you're alluding to here is like, are you willing to do this job for 2 years without pay before you get your opportunity? And then once you get it, it's just going to make you appreciate what you do a whole lot more.
I think a lot of it, especially in our space, like I don't think a lot of people are passionate about it. I think it's like working out or training is like a hobby. So a lot of people like they find training, it's structure in their life, they have some success, like all of a sudden they want to train people. But it's like, okay, what are you willing to do to actually turn that into, a full-time thing? So I always challenge our interns and assistants, like in your free time, are you researching, different strength and conditioning methods? Are you looking like following the people that are doing it at a high level? Are you constantly reading, absorbing content, watching videos? And until you're truly obsessed with something like that, like I think you should find something else. Like wherever your free time is, where all your energy is going, like looking up all that kind of stuff or like being fully immersed in it. That's how I kind of know you have like the green light of like wanting to make this your whole career.
In terms of like, obviously coming up through college and obviously doing all the intern work, how did you then progress from that to your role now?
Yeah. So from there, I was at Kansas for a long time, so it was a lot of opportunities to either screw up or do a good job, and I think I did a good job more than screwed up. And one of the assistant basketball coaches at Kansas took a job at a small school called the University of Southern Mississippi, and he asked me, he was like, "Zach, taking this job. You just graduated. How would you like to be the director of basketball and volleyball at Southern Miss?" And I was like, "Hell yeah!" So I jumped at the opportunity. Went with him. I think I was like 23 at the time. So I was a director. I had a GA that was older than me, a bunch of the players that were older than me just because of, the transfer portal and all that kind of stuff. So it was like I went from being an assistant. When you're an assistant or an intern, like everybody likes you because you don't make any rules and you're just there to make sure everything goes smooth. And so I had to get out of that role and more of like, I'm the director, like whatever happens in this room is a direct reflection of me. And so it took tons of growing up on my part of dealing with sport coaches, administrators, student athletes, sports medicine, like all these things that like the textbook doesn't really train you for. You just kind of have to do it. And I remember my first day, just a whirlwind of meeting with everybody, being in charge of all these teams. I was like, oh my gosh, like what have I gotten myself into? And, during that year I was there, there was like so many growth opportunities that I look back and I'm like, man, I totally would have, handled things different, if I had more experience. But the only way you learn is like stubbing your toe, fixing it, and moving on. From Southern Miss, I left and went to the University of Illinois. There I did women's basketball, volleyball, golf. And then after that, I went back to Kansas for a full-time position with basketball. And when I was there, I was like, cool, I did the full circle. Like I'm back in my, basically my hometown working for my college that I went to. Like this is the dream scenario. I'm like, found my dream scenario at 26. I'm going to retire here. This is going to be great. All my friends and family are here. And then 10 months into that job, Andrea Hootie knocked on my door and was like, hey, Texas wants to interview you. You're going on a plane tomorrow to do that. And I was like, well, I don't know if I want to do that. Like I like Kansas. She's like, no, you don't understand. Like Texas calls. She's like, you don't have a place here. So you need to go to Texas. And interviewed at Texas, got the women's job. And then I've been here for the last 7 seasons. So I assist with the men and I'm the head strength and conditioning coach for the women's basketball team here at Texas.
Yeah, that's incredible, man. Let's dive into that a little bit because, I think I mentioned to you that I do a little bit of strength and conditioning with a rugby team here in Australia, and part of my role is looking after the women's league tackle team in their inaugural season this year, which has been such a cool role and something that I guess I came into with. I wouldn't say trepidation, but I just was a little bit unsure of how that would go. I'd never worked with women in that kind of team environment and that athletic environment. But one of the things I've found, man, is they just work so hard and they're so easy to coach because there's no ego and they're just there to work. And I feel like they all have something to prove. How have you found that transition, and what are some of the key differences, I guess, that you've found with working with the men's side and the women's sides, and how does that feel being, I guess, at the forefront of women's sport in a time where I feel like that's where the growth is at the moment. It's just exploding.
Yeah, I feel like it's been cool recently for the public to see what I've seen my whole career. Like women are savages, they're competitors, like they're ruthless out there. And we always joke, like our women's basketball team here is super successful. We finished 5th in the nation and they kind of set the tone for our basketball facility. Like when the men come in and see them training, they're like kind of blown away with, how competitive they are, how much they get after it. And it's a full-time job. Like if you are weak, like they will find you out. And it's kind of cool to see, the top is different. Like teams that are compete for a national championship, like these athletes are super selfish with their time in their career. Like they understand it's only 4 years and they're going to try to get the most out of it that they can. Mm-hmm. I think it's easier in some respects of like the ego is kind of out of it. I think guys, there's always this, alpha mentality of like, if you tell a guy to take 10 pounds off the bar or 10 kilos off the bar, it's like a shot at his identity and all this stuff. And women are like, cool, awesome, next set. Or I think the communication styles is still a lot easier. You can be straight to the point, more direct. And like with both athletes, like if they know you truly care about them, like they'll run through a brick wall for you. But I thoroughly enjoy my time coaching these women, and it's fun to see, the physical stuff they're able to do, and people that are just now noticing that what we've seen for years come to the limelight, which is awesome.
In terms of obviously, like, having listened to some of the content that like you've been putting out, the Corey's been putting out, the little bit of a change in terms of like not focusing on as much strength work, how has that like been something that you guys have been able to implement with the teams, and how's that been received from the athletes? Because obviously, as Nick mentioned at the start of this podcast, like I work with a basketball club here in Melbourne, and the concept of like, the skill being the priority and them being better basketball is always the priority when it comes to that training. So like similar, like I don't really have them doing a ton of like, full range heavy squats. I don't have them doing a ton of like, there's no barbell benching. There's other attributes that we are training. But I'm curious from your perspective, obviously being at a very high level and being at the forefront, how did you guys go about implementing that, and how was it received by the athletes?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is like, if you want to go to the next level, like what's the differentiator? And it's skill. Like no one gets to the NBA or the WNBA and they're like, oh, they're just not strong enough. Like that's just, you get weeded out way before then. And then I think what people kind of have it twisted is like getting strong in the traditional lifts. So people equate strength to like, can you squat a lot, deadlift a lot, bench a lot? But if you look at an archetype for a good lifter, they're going to pick someone, between 5'10" at the absolute tallest to about 5 feet tall. You're going to pick a short, stocky person, big torso, short limbs, and that's a perfect person to lift weights. And if you were going to make that person a basketball player, they'd be a horrible basketball player. But if you look at the elite basketball players, and there's body typing like crazy at this level, like if you watch an NBA game, everybody looks the same. They have short torsos, long limbs, super lean. And so it's like, why are we testing, strength in these traditional barbell patterns if like they don't fit into that mold? And so what we've done is kind of, our theme days with like a lower body strength emphasis, we might only have one or two guys be able to back squat, that look really good in their back squat. And usually those guys aren't our best athletes. They're our walk-ons, or the guys that just aren't very gifted at basketball. And so, we'll pick whether you got a back squat, a split squat, if you'd be better suited on a leg press, anything like that to get you in a better advantageous position. We found this out. We trained some pros from the NBA that are like probably some of the best players to ever play the game will come and train. And Corey and I can back squat way more than these guys. Like put any weight on, we will bury them in a back squat. And then when we put them, we have this thing called a techno gym leg press. And so it's just basically a leg press. There's no skill involved. Push as hard as you can against the platform. And we're like, oh, we're going to be able to kill these guys in this too. And they blew us out of the water by like 200 or 300 pounds. And you're like, okay, let's remember strength is task specific. And so you can't say a basketball player is weak because they can't squat 2 times their body weight, but they can windmill dunk from the free throw line. And so we kind of notice like a lot of these strength, things that we like to put people in boxes for, like all super compressive strategies, like a back squat. Like I'm not going to lie, like if you want to develop, overall total body strength, especially leg strength, like yes, back squat is a great modality. I'm not saying that. But, if you look at a lot of these like rhythmic type athletes, like basketball, track, all that kind of stuff, when you make somebody really good at back squat, like the highest level back squat and benchers, can they rotate? No. And like, you don't want to be able to rotate if you have a heavy load on your back. Like I would agree, like we need to create stiffness, but if that stiffness is taken away from our ability to be fluid and rotate, then I think we've gone too far. And so me, even with my own training, like I got super strong one summer and I was feeling awesome. And then I go to demo a bunch of stuff and I'm like, shit, there's something's off. Like I feel slow and not as athletic as I used to be. And I videotape my training from time to time. And I was like, dude, you look goofy as hell jumping over these hurdles and all these things. And I'm like, I wonder why that is. And I'm like, maybe because all the lifting I've been doing is all these like compressive strategies instead of being able to rotate. And any movement I was doing where there was rotation involved, like I was god awful. You're not going to see those videos on the internet. But it had me thinking like, okay, if their best attributes are their ability to flow and be fluid, why would I take that away by chasing these strength numbers with, a traditional barbell movement? I think it's just tough for people to grasp. That. Yeah. Because like as strength coaches, like no one really knows, like they're thinking, no, our job, you know what I mean? Like you make people stronger. And I think a really easy thing to show a coach is like everyone gained 50 kilos on their back squat. I did a good job. Everybody gained 50 kilos on their bench press. I did a great job. And it's like, did they become better movers on the court? I don't know. And so I think we got to find, different strategies to kind of load these athletes for skill-based sports.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it can be tough, because, as strength coaches, obviously we got into strength coaching majority of the time because we love training and we lean more towards strength training, right? But it's like, if we're tracking these metrics and the metrics are the gym's not the sport. So are they getting better at the sport, which is the main thing. And I mean, I've noticed that with my own training as well. You mentioned your own training is since 2011, I've been training as a power lifter and got really strong at squatting. And then I've recently linked up with my coach, Killian. I think Killian. He tagged you today in a story. So Killian's coaching me for a track meet, and I send him my running videos, and he's like, "Dude, why the fuck do you run like that?" I'm like, "I don't know. That's just how I move." He's like,
correct, and it just takes away like the fluidity of everything. And I think when people like to put everything in a box, like black, white, right, wrong, whatever. And I'm not denying that like strength is important. You need to be able to produce force. Yes, I agree with that. But it's like the modalities we use to get you strong in certain areas, like I don't think always have to be these super compressive strategies.
Would you guys look at using more like force plates to kind of gauge where someone is in terms of like their ability to produce force without necessarily having to go down that route? Or do you guys have, and I guess like if someone doesn't reach that point, is that when you would potentially put them into some more traditional strength stuff to bring them up to a baseline before you can then take them off in this other direction? Or is there a different way that you guys approach it?
So we'll usually counter movement jump probably like anytime they're in the weight room, especially in the off season. So we'll get like 3 to 5 jumps a week. And then we can kind of bucket guys on like how they produce force. So there's the like tendon type athletes that, they bend their knee, hinge their hips back, bend their knee half an inch, and then they jump through the roof. And there's guys that I assume like us, like you have a full knee bend, very muscularly driven jump up. And so like both guys can have the same vertical, right? Like they're both touching 35 inches, but who's taking longer to get off the ground? And it's like probably the muscularly driven athlete. And those guys thrive with traditional weightlifting methods. Like a guy that's muscularly driven, if he gets stronger, his vertical will go up, which is most people, they are muscularly driven. If more people were tendon driven, there'd be way more people in the NFL and NBA and all that kind of stuff. And so you see these special athletes that like barely bend their knees and jump through the roof. And I'm like, well, why am I going to load that guy up the same? Like, do I want him to take more time to come off the ground? Like, I don't know if I want to do that. So we kind of, for our athletes, kind of lean into their strengths. We obviously want those muscular guys to get more ballistic, but with a lot of those like tendon guys, it's find things that work for them, tap that strength a little bit, but let them lean into what they're good at.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, all right, cool. I want to ask you about this. So I was talking to another strength coach here in Australia yesterday who's coming on the podcast next week. And he shared a post on Instagram from, I believe it was the Pelicans or something like that. They just won a game and they'd gone straight into the gym and they started training. And the comment section on that post was wild. Like it was insane, the amount of comments from people in there that just didn't understand why these guys were in the gym training straight after the game. And that's something that you guys do quite a lot with this microdosing training. And I'd love you to talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I think, the great part about social media is anyone can post and comment. And the worst part about social media is everyone can post and comment. And so people, it's wild. Like they'll make some comment on your post and you look at them and you're like, you click on their thing and it's like, you're an accountant from Cleveland who doesn't even like, what are you talking about? Whatever. Gives everyone a voice. I'm all for it. But the basic premise behind that is like, keep your high days high and your low days low. And so the old way I think of thinking about stuff was like, if we have a hard day on the court, let's have an easy day in the weight room. That way they won't be tired. And if we have an easy day on the court, let's have a hard day in the weight room. But then all you have is medium days. And so if we really look at, periodization, like you want to have, you'll have high weeks and low weeks and undulate the volume and all that kind of stuff. And we do that through our week with basketball by on their game days should be their highest lows of the week. If they're not, you need to look back at your practice schedule, maybe tweak some things, but competition should be your highest exposure that day. And our players that play the most, they will lift after the game just to keep their high days to high days. And so usually after a game, we have a day off. And what I don't want to do is bring them in on their off day. They're tired and sore from the game. And then we're lifting them. So they're going to get, they're not getting enough time to fully recover till the next practice. And so what I want to do is after the game, they're going to hit some really heavy ISOs, usually some like hamstring work. Cause like, I don't care how many times you do RDLs, like you're always sore from RDLs the next day. And so that's kind of a way we get all our hinging in is on those game days. Players that don't play or low minutes, they're like kind of developmental athletes. Like they will come in that morning and train. It'll be the same type of lift as post game, but usually more volume, more intensity. The lift will be quite a bit longer. Usually after the game, like everyone thinks of lifting like has to be an hour, but like after the game, it might be 10 to 15 minutes tops, just depending on, how many minutes you played. But yeah, we try to keep everyone, whether they're a high minute or low minute, like game days are high. So even like our players that don't play a lot, like in the morning, they get a lift in and then they get into individual work with their coaches. So they'll get up and down the court, play 2-on-2, 3-on-3, 5-on-5, to kind of almost mimic that they have a game that day also.
So talk us through what would a game day generally look like from start to finish for, let's say, like a high minute player?
Yeah, high minute player, let's say we play at like 7 p.m. So everyone will come in. We have like a team breakfast. If they're on the road, we'll just be at the hotel. If they're at home, they'll go to classes. But so they got team breakfast, they got their morning activities, and then usually we'll have like a shoot around that's like 4 hours before the game. Shoot around, it's basically an hour to hour and a half, and we'll do like shooting, obviously, work on like our fundamentals to, be a good basketball player. And then we go over all the schemes of like who we're playing against. So if it's a zone team, we're going to go against all those sets. If a team that presses a lot, we're going to get up and down a little bit. And then they'll eat after that, have some time off their feet. And then about 2 hours, 2 hour and a half before the game, they'll have little segmented groups. So like 10, 15 minute, like individual. It'll be like two guys do a group. They'll come out, do their game-like shots. So if you're a three-point shooter at the top of the key, like you're shooting a million shots at the top of the key right there. If you're a post player, you're shooting everything in the paint. Like it's going to be all your game type scenarios. If you just dribble and pass, you can do a lot of dribbling and passing in your segment. They'll do that and then come get kind of an individualized warm up with Corey and I, whether they need, more stiffness or more mobility, all that kind of stuff. That's when we really work on like their foot and ankle complex. They'll go back in the locker room, put ankle braces on, tape up, whatever they'll need. And then an hour before the game, we do like our team warm up where like half the group warms up with the strength staff. The other half is with their sport coaches. We'll flip, go back in the locker room, and then get ready to play. And then after that game, our high minute players, they'll get their lift in. So it's like 10 to 15 minutes. Usually it's like Nordics, some Bulgarian split squats, maybe some RDLs, and then, 3 to 6 sets of that kind of stuff. And then they're done.
It's a very busy, but like a really nice balance of stuff that they've got throughout the day, isn't it?
Yeah, basically we want everything they do that day to like build upon the game. So like the shoot around we have should mimic the game we're going to have, the tactical side of everything, their individual work before the game. It should mimic what they're actually going to do in the game. It seems like a wild concept, but I see teams warm up all the time where I'm like, that guy hasn't shot a 3-pointer all season and he's warming up shooting a bunch of threes. Like it doesn't make sense to me. And so we'll educate the athletes on like why we're doing these things, and they're kind of bought in at that point. Like when you lay it all out, it makes sense. And then that's the easiest part about, my biggest questions is like, how do you get these guys to lift after a game? And I'm like, okay, it's easy. I can give them 2 options. They can lift for 10 minutes after the game, or they can come in tomorrow on their off day and lift for 30 or 45 minutes. Like, I'm not the smartest guy around, but 10 minutes when I'm already there sounds a lot easier than coming in the next day. Like on my off day, like I want to get treatment, sit in the sauna, eat good food, and go to bed. You know what I mean? And so it's kind of one of those things like 100%. We'll lay it out for these guys of like, here's your options. I'd recommend option A, but here's option B and C. And let me know what you need to be, the best player possible. I think if you give them ownership of their program and they see the value of, hey, this is our high stressor day, we need to keep this the high stressor day because of this, then they'll buy in immediately.
Like obviously we've spoken a lot about like your, the trajectory of your career and what you do with your players. If we kind of pivot a little bit here for a sec, what are some things external to coaching and basketball that drive you as an individual to be as successful as you have been?
I think coming up in this, like everybody told me not to do strength and conditioning, especially like my parents, like they were very supportive, but I think their worst fear was like, I was going to be working in a box gym that I didn't like and, get frustrated. And then, all I have is a kinesiology degree. And so it's like not many, big companies are looking for guys with no sales experience and a kinesiology degree. Like that doesn't really help most companies. And I think they're just worried with how competitive it is over here. Like everyone wants to be a performance coach. I think they're just trying to look out for my well-being. And I totally appreciate that. And just didn't want me to get a degree in something that is so small and so specific. And then from there, like I've always like, if I'm going to do something, like I'm not half-assing it, I'm full-assing it. So, I was like, you're in this position, all these people took chances on you, from Hootie, giving me an opportunity to clean the weight room, to the guy that answered my email that didn't even know me. Like all these people, gave me a shot and kind of put their stamp on me. And I would just hate to show up on my first day of work with a great recommendation and then them call them and be like, why'd you recommend this guy? Like he sucks. Like he's not good at what he does. And I think when you realize like these players and coaches kind of trust you with their development, like these athletes come to these schools and, I'm in charge of making sure that they're able to play at the best of their ability for their short career here. And I feel like if I'm not doing every single thing I can to help give them that slight edge, like I'm just doing a disservice to everybody. So I feel like in my career, if I ever get to a point where I'm not trying to, or I'm just like complacent with running the same program I've been running or whatever, then I think that's a time for me to get out. But I think the human body is so complex and fascinating that like I don't think you're ever going to be ahead of it. I feel like the second you think you have stuff figured out, you read another article or see something that just totally changes your mind on how you do everything.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned earlier that you guys are really competitive. I think you, from memory, said top 5 in the country. And I know what March Madness is, and I know what the craziness of March Madness is because of my time in the States. And so for anyone that's over here on this side of the pond, all of the convicts that may not know exactly what's entailed in March Madness, could you maybe give us a rundown of what that looks like for you guys? And then from your perspective, like how do you manage that? How do you manage still getting the work in, managing the fatigue? What does that look like? For me, problem solving is something that really like keeps me going. And I feel like March Madness is just this like one big problem that you're constantly having to solve for.
Yeah, so March Madness is like the big question mark with everybody's season. So it's the big national tournament. So between March and then the beginning of April is our big basketball tournament. And so to get into March Madness, you have to be ranked, a certain rank. And then if you win your conference tournament, you have an automatic bid to get in. So let's say you had the worst season. There's plenty of teams like this. They're like near the bottom of their conference, got lucky in their conference tournament, which is 4 games in a row, and ended up winning it, and they get a bid to March Madness. Luckily, we're in a little bigger conference, the Big 12. It's super competitive basketball conference, so I think we got 6 or 7 teams that got in. We were ranked, I think, 4th, or we were pretty high up, and so we were a number 1 overall seed in our region, which is like crazy because it's all about matchups. So you dictate kind of who you play with how good your season was thus far. So March Madness is all about matchups. It's one game, loser goes home, winner advances. So if you don't have a very good, successful regular season, you might be matched up to a really hard opponent like the first or second round. And so basically your whole season kind of sets you up for this crazy month. And I think it's like 5 or 6 weeks, and you play 2 games a week. So it'll either be Thursday, Saturday, or Friday, Sunday. So usually you have one off day before you play again. And that's when really juggling, fatigue management and all the things you've done throughout the year, you're either going to have a lot of success during March Madness, or that fatigue and everything is going to set in and you're not going to have a very good time.
Mm-hmm. So do you guys kind of the work prior to that coming up, is March Madness something that you keep in mind with your programming and your periodization, I guess, leading into that? Or is it just kind of like when it gets here, we'll figure it out?
Yeah, we kind of like throughout our whole, macro cycle of the year, we have these phases where we call them like a health phase or performance phase. So you're either chasing performance or chasing health, and health and performance are not the same thing. So everyone's like, oh, well, if you're healthy, then you can perform well. And if you're, but it doesn't work that way. So usually when you find yourself performing the best athletically, that's when you probably feel the worst. Like you're super tight, you're wound up, but super reactive, which is very advantageous. But if you're like that all the time, like you're going to get hurt. So that's why you have to chase kind of, health. And so we'll just start at the very end. So let's just say we won the national championship. We have 2 months off before our summer training. And so that 2 months is focused on health. So it's long, compliant, full range of motion movements, a lot of things, single leg. The intensity is super far down. Like, I don't care how much weight's on the bar. I care about quality of movement and restoring function. As we get into June, July, August, we're chasing performance numbers just because on the court, they can only practice for 2 hours a week and 6 hours a week they can have on the sports performance side. So that's my biggest time of uninterrupted training. And I'm like, okay, we got to build, quote unquote, great base during the summer. So we're chasing performance. Once the season starts and practice ramps up, they can practice up to like 20 hours a week. So it goes from 2 hours to 20. So as you guys know, that's a volume nightmare, especially for coaches that don't understand, like, okay, you need to maybe go up a little bit every week, not just start with 20 hours. So on the weight room performance end, I chase health during those 2 months. So like October, November, we're chasing health. And then we're slowly ramping up performance until basically conference season, which is like January, February, March. And so that's the time where we need everyone to be clicking on all cylinders. That's when I want our force plate numbers to be the best. That's when I want, our fatigue to be the lowest. You're not always going to get that just because you play, so many games. So it's just a constant juggling act and getting athletes and coaches to kind of understand like what you did yesterday is going to affect today, and what you do today is going to affect tomorrow. And so kind of understand that fatigue model. You can't just floor it every single day. And so that's kind of how we educate our athletes of like, okay, practice is going to be hard. What are some modalities that we can do to help with your recovery process? So we always harp on the basics first, hydration, food, and sleep. Without those, I don't care how many cold plunges you have, Normatec boots, hypnosis guy you're working with, like that doesn't matter. And so we take it to the extreme with all that kind of stuff where hydration, especially because I think, that's something you can totally control. And so we do a hydration test. So these athletes, they'll pee in a cup, before practice. We'll test to see if they're dehydrated, not dehydrated. And then usually, an athlete that can't stay hydrated, I would almost put, all my money on that they're probably not eating correctly. If you can't drink water throughout the day, you're probably not making meals a priority. And then if meals aren't a priority, I doubt you're going to sleep when you should. And so we're trying to always directly correlate with these athletes of like how they feel versus what they've done to prepare for practice. So our biggest theme is like practice is the most important part of your day. Like go to school, do a good job there. But practice is the most important part of the day. So if I practice at 3 p.m., in order for me to have good practice, I need to be well slept, well fed, and well hydrated with all the, proper things that I need to go in my system. And we'll kind of draw lines where it's like you had a bad practice. Okay, I noticed you failed your hydration test. You weren't drinking water. And then what'd you have for lunch? Oh, you skipped lunch. Okay, so notice we weren't prepared to have a really good practice. So you missed the opportunity at practice to get better because you're underfueled and underhydrated. Or vice versa. Like you had an unbelievable practice. You ate a good lunch. You showed up hydrated. Like, let's do this more often. And then we kind of track those metrics. So, when athletes or coaches say like, they're trying to play the blame game of, they're out of shape or all these other factors that we know aren't true. And it's like, well, I can look and out of the last month, they failed 25 hydration tests and missed lunch on the majority of those days. And so we can't have consistent practices. So therefore your skill development is going to be hindered because your inability to drink water or, go to bed on time. And then from there, we're lucky enough at Texas where we give them so many recovery modalities. Like they get sports massages. We got hot tub, cold tub, sauna, Normatec boots, a full-time athletic trainer that works with us, like all these different modalities. And during the off season, we have them try them out. And, you read research on everything of like saunas are good, saunas are bad, cold plunges are good, cold plunges are bad. But if they think that, certain recovery modality gets them feeling fresh for the next day, like those are the things I want to use, in that championship time of the year.
Yeah, it's just leveraging that emotional connection to something as well, which within sports and sports performance is so important, right? It's like do I really care if a cold plunge doesn't actually make you recovered? If you think it does, that's all that really matters at that point.
Well, the placebo effect, I mean, it's an effect for a reason. Like, people take sugar pills and they tell them it's going to make them jump higher, and they have a great practice. Like, we know that sugar pill didn't do anything, but if, the athlete thinks that that's going to help them the next day, like, who am I to tell them, like, don't get in the cold plunge or don't sit in the sauna? And then just drawing those correlations, I think most people don't correlate with, like, what they eat to, like, how they felt later in the day. And they just think that, like, oh, I had fast food for lunch. That's food. That's fine. But then you're lethargic and tired and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of, pointing them in the right direction without, kind of forcing them to, like, you need to do all this stuff. So I think that open communication helps with a lot of things. Now, it makes you frustrated at times, but it's your job to teach.
Yeah, it's all part of it, right? So we've stole this next bit off you guys, so you should be very familiar with it.
Oh, nice.
The first one is rant. So what's something that gets you ranting at the moment? It could be anything, mate. This is a safe space.
Yeah, I think the rant is probably, like we talked about earlier, like everything being like black and white. Like, people take all these camps on, like, this methodology or that methodology. And I feel like all this stuff, like, you see it all. I had to just get off Twitter because it's just like argument city about anything. And I think a lot of the stuff with, like, context, like, we had that post about back squatting, and people, listen to the 10-second clip, and all of a sudden Corey's stupid and I'm dumb and we don't know what we're talking about. It's like, well, if you listen to the whole podcast, it's different. But I think people just getting too one-dimensional with everything, of, like, this one method's worked for my athletes, this is the only method, any other method is dumb, blah, 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 blah. So I think, being more open to that kind of stuff would benefit people a lot more.
Yeah.
And sorry, go on.
I was just going to say, it takes a level of, I guess, self-awareness and confidence to be able to accept that your way is not the only way. And just because maybe someone has a different point of view isn't necessarily a personal attack on you. And it's okay if something else works.
Totally. And I think, looking back at my younger self, it's kind of made me realize, like, the less knowledge like, your opinions at everything are way smaller just because you don't know the other way of doing stuff. So, like, when I was a young strength coach, like, I just prided myself on, like, everyone could lift perfectly. Like, the back squats, everyone's butt was on their heels, perfect clean snatch, like, all that kind of stuff. And then I look back and I'm like, was I wasting, like, who was I doing this for? Like, was I wasting all this time fitting kids into positions like they probably had no business being in, because I wanted to show my mark as a good strength coach of, like, look at my video, my 6'10" person can perfectly back squat. And it's like, did that make them a better athlete? Like, shoot, I don't think so. But the longer I've gotten,
it comes down to personal bias as well, right?
Totally. I mean, you want so bad to, like, what you do work. Like, that's why we program the way we program. But just kind of having the opportunity to be at different places and seeing other coaches who are just as successful or more successful doing things a different way. And it kind of has you think of, like, oh, maybe, they are right. Maybe there's a little truth in not chasing after that. So I think, people's opinions are basically only things that they've been exposed to. So if they've never seen other things, like, it's tough to really have an opinion about something that you haven't seen or been exposed to.
Mm-hmm.
On the, obviously, like, the flip side of the ranting side of things, what's something you are raving about at the moment?
Raving? I wish this happened more when I was younger, but we didn't have, social media or anything. But I think the ability to connect with coaches, like, all over the planet through, like, social media or blog posts or YouTube videos. Like, I remember coming up, my only resource for strength and conditioning was, like, T Nation, bodybuilding.com, and then what my buddy's uncle who played in the NFL said. Like that was your only resources. But it's like now, like just a quick Google search or Instagram search, and I can find what are these top coaches doing, in my state, my country, or the world. Like that's so cool that we're just exposed to all that kind of stuff. And I can look around and connect with these coaches that I would never meet anytime before. So I think it's cool, people's ability to share things. I feel like strength and conditioning for so long, like people would guard their programs or guard their methods or guard everything. And now I think the transparency of everything, like if you think you have something good or valuable and you share it, like that can help so many coaches compared to what it was before. So I'm all for the people sharing the great stuff they have and then having good dialogue. Like I've had so many coaches DM me asking me questions on like why I did that or why have I thought about this. And I've done the same thing. I'll hit up a coach and like Killian, he did something today and I was like, dude, I never thought of that. Like I'm definitely taking that. What's your experience with it? All that kind of stuff. And without, this vessel of social media, like I don't think you get those collaborative efforts.
Yeah, we highlighted the negative side of social media a little bit earlier, but I 100% agree with you, man. I mean, look at us now, sitting in this room with you talking about basketball and strength and conditioning with you over there in Texas, and we're sitting here in Australia in our office, and this is something that when I was growing up, getting my information off Elite FTS articles.
Yeah, Elite FTS too. Yeah.
Never thought would happen. So, yeah, man, I'm 100% agree with you. Like to be able to have the opportunities that we have now to get in the rooms with people all over the world it's pretty mind blowing, to be honest. And, it definitely is a net positive for all the negatives that come with it.
Yeah, I think the negatives you just kind of have to take it with like. I feel like I heard a good quote. It was like. Everyone's worried about like people like hating on them or like thinking less, but it's like no one who's like above you is hating on you. You know what I mean? Like if you're above someone, you're probably not taking the time to be like, this guy's shit. Why did you do that? And so like the only people's opinions who I really care about would be like coaches who I respect and people, that are thought leaders in the field, and they're probably not going to address me in the comments with something. They'd probably like DM me and be like, hey, I've tried that before. Like, here's what I ran into. You can probably still do it if you want. And so you just kind of have to look at what it is. Like if someone's got a problem with your post, then it probably says more about them, than it does you. So it's like on to the next one.
We also have like a couple of other questions that we like to kind of round out our guest episodes with. And one of the questions that we have as part of that is, if you could have dinner with any person, whether they're dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Ooh, any person dead or alive. I would say probably someone wild like Albert Einstein or somebody weird like that. Like I think it'd be cool just like we think about, we have crazy ideas with strength conditioning, and imagine being him or Thomas Edison or someone like that that's like, yo, I'm about to put this thing together and you're about to have electricity through your house. Like these like wild concepts that people just have no idea even exist, and like we're sometimes afraid to share our ideas that we have of sounding stupid. And imagine that guy coming in and being like, yo, we don't have to have fire anymore to see in our house. Like you can flip this switch and, see that. And I think really just any outside the box thinkers that kind of go against the norm would be cool. Present day, like Elon Musk would just be so cool. I don't even think I would know what type of questions to ask him. I don't think I'm even smart enough to know what to even ask a guy like that. But yeah, I think anyone who's like a big time thought leader and kind of not afraid of putting their ideas out there, like that's who I definitely want to have dinner with.
Nice. Yeah, I watched that movie Oppenheimer recently. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
There's someone like that, right along that same same thought process of someone who's super interesting that thought a little bit outside the box and wasn't really worried about what the consequences of that were. Yeah, that'd be wild.
I think a lot of like super successful people, like they have to think outside the box, and you can't really worry about, once again, what other people think. Like if you have a good idea, like chase it and see what happens.
Yeah, 100%. All right, so the last kind of thing that we do is we have our previous guest ask the next guest a question.
Ooh.
So you don't get to know who the previous guest was. You don't get to know who the next guest was. But the previous guest asked you, have you had any, or do you have any ghost stories or any near-death experiences?
Ooh. Near death. Yeah, this is kind of funny. I'll leave his name out of it. But I was flying to a clinic, strength conditioning clinic, and I was on an airplane, and they're like, we have to make an emergency landing in Missouri. You guys will be fine. Like, not a big deal. And I was like, okay, whatever. There's a lot of turbulence. So I'm like, okay, like we're not going to die. It's fine. And then like the masks from the airplane come down and the flight attendants start freaking out. I'm like, oh my God, this is how I'm going to die. Go and do some stupid strength conditioning clinic in the middle of Missouri. And
Missouri of all places.
We like, it's this crazy storm. We land and like, okay, we're good. And we get out of the plane and there's all these fire trucks and ambulances everywhere. I'm like, oh my God, like this is way more serious than we thought. Like people on the plane, like, when everyone's fine with turbulence and then they just see like just the look of sheer terror on like grown men's faces. And you're like, oh my God, like maybe we might be going down. So that happened and we get off and I'm like, wow, I almost died like crazy. And I'm in the airport terminal and I see an ESPN broadcaster who was on my flight and I didn't know he was on there. And he was like, hey man, crazy landing, like all that kind of stuff. And he's like, where are you going? And I was like, Lawrence, Kansas. And he's like, no way, I'm going there too. And he's like, you want to get a rental car? And I was like, absolutely. He's like, ESPN will pay for it. It's fine. Just jump in the car. And I was like, cool. And this was like tornadoes and stuff going on. And I'm like, you sure we should drive? And he's like, yeah, man, it's fine. Like the odds of tornado happening, not a big deal. And we get in this minivan and I knew him because he's like broadcasted a couple of our games, but I just know him as like, hey man, good to see you. Like nothing like that. And he's a broadcaster. So he's a big time talker. And so like we're in there and you ever been driving with somebody and instead of telling the story, keeping their eyes on the road, they just like look at you the whole time. And I'm there and he's like telling me all these stories about how he used to coach college basketball, this and that. And the rain at this time is coming down so hard. And we're on like 2-lane highways. He's driving very fast. And I'm like, yeah, like great story. Like look at the road. And we're going and the windshield wiper breaks. And I'm like, oh good, the windshield wiper breaks. He's for sure going to pull over, because it's raining so incredibly hard. And he's like, oh, this is a trick we used to do in my mid-major days in college. You just drive faster and the water comes off the windshield quicker. And I'm just like, what? I thought he was just joking. So he goes up like 90, 95. We're in this minivan. And I mean, the rain's coming off, but like not enough where I'm comfortable with him looking at me telling stories. And so we're like doing that. And the whole time I'm like texting my friends. I'm like, dude, I'm going to die with this ESPN reporter. So when you see the Twitter thing leak that, he's dead and then another guy in the car's dead, you'll know that other guy is me. And we finally get to the location. Yeah. And I'm just like, thank God. He's like, yeah, not a bad trip, right? I told you that 90-mile-an-hour thing would work. And I'm just like, yeah, whatever. I'm never getting in a car with you ever again. So that was my near-death experience for sure.
Dude, that's a 2 near-death experiences back to back.
Well, that's what I was like, surely I can't die twice in a day. And then I'm like, oh my God, this must be my time to go. And I didn't die on the plane. So I'm going to die in this minivan. So the whole rest of the day I was paranoid. I'm like, what's next? Something going to fall out of a building and hit me? Am I going to hit by a bus? But I'm still here. So cheated death.
Yeah, it's like third time's a charm.
Yeah.
You got through it. Cool. So off the back of that, what is a question that you would like to ask the next guest?
I don't want to be too generic. Maybe one thing you could change about the field, but it can't be like exercise related.
Cool. I love it. That's a nice thought-provoking question.
Now, don't ask me that. I don't know what I want to change.
You beat me to it. Oh man, I love it. I'm probably just gonna call it there. Where can everyone find you? Do you want to do the little the thing that everyone does at the end of their podcast?
Yeah,
tell people where they can find you.
Sure.
What you've got going on, all of that cool stuff.
Yeah. Right now, what I got going on is I have a few online programs going out. One's called Z Train. It's a monthly training subscription. And it's basically like guys that still want to be athletic and look jacked. I always joke that this phase of my training, I just want to look like I'm really strong without being really strong. And then we have like a women's only program. That's kind of the same thing. So basically what I've learned training women throughout the last decade, I think there's a lot of like misnomers with training women that they need to do like kickbacks and band exercises. And then they wonder why they don't look like their favorite, fitness people. And so, we introduced dumbbell training, barbell training, all that kind of stuff we've known for years, but no one wants to listen to us. And then a basketball program that I just launched. That's called Feel Good, Play Better. So that's been my tagline for a lot of our training. I want you to feel good lifting, and then I need you to play even better. Social, I think the best way to find me is on Instagram. So it's Zack, ZACK _ ZILLNER. And I'm usually pretty good with get back with DMs and comments and all that kind of stuff. So that's usually the best place you can find me. If you find me on email, I'm horrible at email, so you might have to wait a couple weeks before I get back to you on that.
Beautiful. Thanks so much for joining us, man.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. And if I'm ever in Australia, you guys are the first two guys I'm hitting up.
Hell yeah.
Yeah, hit us up.